Today we are working on attaching the nose. This is before we put the car on the ground because I was still stuck waiting for the fuel tank to show up before I got it down to finish the suspension video. But we're working on this, and what we've got here, so these are quick release pins. There's one on each side that the whole thing hinges on. And I don't have that one in all the way. So these are just some tubing welded in, 5/16 inch thick quick release pins going in. And that means that the whole thing now hinges, and rather easily. Something I did down here to make sure that nose tray met up well with the nose is I added this little bit of weather stripping in there, and it was just old leftover stuff that I had, and it's fallen apart. So I'm going to replace it with something a little thicker. And the idea, I mean, you could argue it's cosmetic so you can't see light through there, but I don't want air escaping through there too much since we are trying to do some underbody aerodynamics. But you just get this from McMaster-Carr, and you can get it for whatever thickness you're going to clip it onto and what orientation, and then how thick the actual weather stripping part is. But with that stuff done, what I've been working on today is, oh yeah, let's put this down. What I'm working on today are these Dzus fasteners, and it looks like we're going to have 3. I was planning just 2. This one's already in place. This, you just put a tool in or a dime or whatever and push it down, and of course it's not finding its grip right now because it's just trying to embarrass me. Hold on. I mean, a screwdriver works, but they sell these. These fatter ones are nice because they're less likely to slip out when you're pressing down and scratch up your paint. There we go. So they just do that, and then this is in nice and tight. And so how this works on the underneath side, hold on, let me get something to prop the hood up with. So what I've done underneath is I've just made this kind of bracket thing here. You can buy ready-made things, but I never find that they're exactly what I need, that like, maybe they'll get you closer and you have to do less work. But this isn't hard. It's just some leftover sheet aluminum. You drill a hole. There's a wire that it grips onto. I'll show you in a second. And so that's riveted in with a hole, and that's so that this guy here is something to grip to. And that holds it down. I need these in place to hold the nose in the exact position I want, so that when I line up the doors and tail, everything stays exactly where I put it. So what we're doing right now is on this side. So this is just a hole. And I've already test fit this. That's how come I've already got rivet holes in. If you make the hole just a little bit bigger, it just gives you this little bit of wiggle room, which is nice when you're doing your final assembly. And then down here, you can see the bracket I'm making, and it needs its rivets. And you can see the little wire in there. But here, I'll pull this out and show it to you better. This is just clankoed in at the moment, but it works. So we are ready to rivet it in. So there is no mystery to this. This was a flat piece of aluminum that I just folded. But because I've got some weird angles on the top of the cowl area of the chassis, it is a little more complicated than I'd prefer. Normally I just make a rectangle with tabs going down. This here is the wire, and it's a spring so that it can hold under tension. But have some springiness to it. So we're going to rivet that in, and then I'll show you the last thing that we've got to do to make the nose right, other than leave it secured so nobody ever sees the crappy job I did on the other side. Oh no, don't look at that. So the way I do this, and you'll see when I'm going to do one more, and you'll see, is I figure out roughly where I want it in the chassis, and then exactly where I want it on the nose, and I drill a hole in the nose and then use that to mark where it's going to be in the chassis, and then I make this thing, and then I put the nose down again and remark on this where it's going to be, and I make this the exact height I need based on, you know, putting this down and measuring through that hole. So it's a lot of like making a piece, checking, making a piece, checking. But you get there in the end and everything lines up pretty easily. So even without this riveted in, you can test fit it if it's in just the right spot. There we go. Which isn't a perfect alignment in my hole, which is why I made that hole bigger, and I'll fill that in before we paint it. It's a good idea if you're using blind rivets with carbon fiber or fiberglass to put backing plates in. I'm going to grab a couple. You can, obviously you can buy those, you can make your own out of leftover aluminum, but you can even, sometimes I've wanted more support, so I've just made like a whole underside thing that goes underneath with a hole for the middle part, and it rivets too and just sandwiches the whole thing. You can also help the rivets out by gluing it in, by, you know, epoxy. There's really not much to this. I mean, this isn't even riveted in. You can see that, like, yeah, I can flex the nose, but it's not going anywhere. I could stand on it over here. It's all pretty simple and straightforward. Does not make for an exciting video. Of course, what if my stuff does? So that guy's in place, but it would make a lot of sense to have three. Two would be secure enough. It seems like it wouldn't be bad to have one here in the middle. I've got an issue in that I've got one of my access holes for doing the wiring pretty much in the middle. So I'm gonna have to come over to the side, and because that's gonna be crooked, I kind of thought about just not doing that. Two of these with the two things in the front is plenty to secure this nose, but let me show you why I'm gonna do that. Okay, ignore this gap here because I haven't set, you know, we'll align the door so it meets up at the right angle. Something that I've noticed since I first made the nose is if you look down here, you'll see that it's coming in, you know, it's a little bit too narrow here, and it wasn't that narrow when I made it, and I'll show you what happened. I don't want this to necessarily come all the way out, but I'll try to, you know, I want it to be a little more like that. What happens is this here bowed a little bit just on its own, and if I press down here, you see, let's see how close I can get on that. See, that's pressing down, that's letting off. I can close that gap I need just by securing, just getting this to press down here in the middle. Since I've got that access hole right here, this here is free space on the chassis, so I'm going to put one right here, and we'll just set up the camera and let it roll while I take care of that. Something else I should point out is these Dzus fasteners, and these are the 3/8 inch size. They have a smaller 5/16 inch size. 3/8 is what you see on vintage cars. I think 5/16 is a more modern thing. But they come in different heights. So this is 400, or I believe it's 0.4 of an inch. This one is 0.5 of an inch, and this one is 0.6 in here. So what that allows you to do is, when you're doing all this, it gives you a little wiggle room in that, I try to do everything with the 500, and then if I need a little more reach, I can put a 600 in, or if I need it to pull a little tighter, I can put a 400 in. They also come with different heights on the springs, but I've only seen 2 different sizes. It's like a 1/4 inch or just over a 1/4 inch. So I try to get everything done with the height on these things. Let's see what it's like. What happens if I do this guy first? Okay, let's take a look at what's been going on with the rear tail work. This guy here is a little weird, and there was kind of a progression of how we got here. What I intended and what I needed was a structure that came up here, and this was originally this just went across. This was to support the rear tail work. You can see this is open. I didn't bother capping this, or normally I if this were like more structural, I would have had this done at a 45-degree angle. So all the ends were closed up, and it's stronger that way. But part of the reason I didn't was the tail's got a little bit of an angle. It sits higher in the back than the front. And to make sure I got that angle right, it was really easy to just cut this tubing going straight up and down at that angle, and then weld this on, and that meant the angle matched all perfectly. I then realized, oh, well, shoot, with this bar here, that means I can't put the engine and transmission in as a unit. This bar comes out, so you can lift the whole thing out, and the Indy car you have to put the engine in separately and then the transmission. And the GT40 you don't, and I like working on the GT40 so much more. It's so much easier not having to, separating it's not that big a deal, but bolting it back in, especially by yourself, is just a pain in the butt. So I thought, okay, well, I will just make this top part detachable, and I'll cut it down here and have like just a sleeve, just a bigger piece of square tubing that will like slide on, you'll put a bolt through. And then I realized, oh, but I want to make the support things for the rear of the tunnels, and I kind of want them, for structural reasons, to go up as high as possible. So that's going to be a problem. And I guess I could have made small tabs that went in there or something. But my next bright idea was to just have it come back with a cutout that's big enough. So you've got about like 2 extra inches, which isn't a lot, but it will work. I checked. If I had just had a bar going across, you could get the engine transmission in if you got it at like a 28-degree angle. But that is the kind of thing that makes me nervous. So this is kind of the easier solution. And then these brackets here, their only purpose is to have a place for the Dzus fasteners in the rear. The other attaching points then are, there's a bracket like this on each side, and then these are actually Mustang style hood pins, and they weren't what I thought I was ordering. So I have pins like that in the tail of the GT40 that are smaller, and I saw these were listed as being bigger, and I was like, oh great, they'll be sturdier. But they're actually meant for Mustangs, and because of that, they have a certain way about, because they're supposed to be going through a metal hood, that doesn't really work for me so much. So one of the things is I couldn't get them low enough to make sure that this was holding down. You put the pin in here, I'll show you in a second. You put the pin in, and that holds the tail work down to this bracket that I welded in. And you're supposed to have a nut on top and a nut on the bottom. Well, as you can see, there's no thread left because of how far down I have to have this in. So I actually welded in a nut to this bracket that it screws into, and then you take the second nut and use that as a jam nut to hold it in place. Well, here, if we look down here, you can see that. And this was just some mild steel I put together and welded on with my cheap crap Harbor Freight welder. And then so how all of this works together. Let me put this on the tripod so I can show you. Oh, before we put it on, I should also explain these bars, these supports. I was pretty sure I was going to have to do something which you see in period, which is you can't put the tail on and off with the bars in place. And so what you do is you get these quick release pins, and they're really strong, and they've got a catch thing. You have to press this button or you know, you can't pull them out. And so you would take these out to put the tail on. What I found though is I can put the tail on and off with this one in place. So what I think I'm going to do as a standard practice once the car's all done, you know, the engine's in, is I'm actually going to put bolts in this one just to be that extra bit secure. And then this one, this side, we'll use the pins. So let me put the camera on a tripod and show you how the rear attaches. Got two of these pins. Okay, and then you might be saying, well, what's the deal with these just bare holes here? Isn't there supposed to be some Dzus fasteners in there? And I'll show you what we're doing. What you may have noticed, and this wasn't in the original design, is that my exhaust clearly is going to be coming out the top of the bodywork, not going down underneath. You might just say, oh, why don't you use different headers? Why do you have to use those headers? Yeah, I can get different headers. The reason I like using these headers is they're $89 a pair, and most sets of headers are like $400 a set, and they go up from there. So not only are these cheap, but it also makes them cheap when you have to replace them. I realized if it's going to come up, that also gives me some advantages in that I don't have all that heat trapped under the bodywork. I'm less likely to be getting heat soak in my starter. So I've made this thing that looks like some poorly designed longhorn steer ornament, and this has the Dzus fasteners in it, and so this goes down there it is. And this becomes, obviously I haven't been able to do yet because my block is going to be taller than that, but I'll have a couple glass packs here, and these are just washers that have been hammered in a vise to be folded at an angle, and you weld them on, and you use them to clip a spring to. And usually I do two really stout springs, and I weld on washers on where the exhaust piece I'm going to do, and have that go. Here, let me take the glove off so I can do this. So that'll go on that. I don't know, this spring is stout enough. I was kind of basing it on ones I'd seen in period, and you know, it's not going to hold it like this. It's too lopsided. But when the exhaust is attached, the idea of the spring is just to retain it to this and allow it to vibrate and not be driving that straight into the car. And I'll probably put, if I take this out, I'll probably put some like header wrap in here just to be kind of a cushion. Not that it's gonna matter, but I've done it without. I've done it with it. I've done it without it on things. But a lot of times, what you do is you mount your exhaust support to the gearbox, because any vibration that's coming from the engine is also in the gearbox, and so all your vibrating things are all bolted to each other. In this case, it's going to the bodywork, so damping of vibrations could be a good thing. So the obvious downsides to having the tail this way with the exhaust going over is obviously there's no way I can have it hinge up, which is fine. I much prefer being able to just lift it off. And bear in mind that I might make a cover for this part, this opening at some point, but it's not really something, it's like something I might do when I'm bored one day. So the engine's going to be open. You'll be able to get to the carburetor, you'll be able to get to the spark plugs. Generally, you don't need to take the bodywork off to do a lot of small things that you would normally do on this. And when the exhaust is all connected, the engine will be able to support it. I mean, the exhaust will be able to support itself. So what you do is you just take the spring off, and then you undo these and you pull this out from under, and then you pull the body off. So it's not the easiest solution, but it is going to work, and there are some upsides. Like I said, the exhaust not having to deal with the heat being under the car. Not great for airflow going to the spoiler, and at some point there's going to be a rear wing, but it looks cool, like a motorboat. The doors of the car, not the band, they're, again, I mean, we talked about this when we made them. There's just a piano hinge there, and then what I did as a latch, I was looking at different hot rod latches, and they definitely would have worked. It's just didn't seem very period correct. So what I ended up doing is I found from a race car supplier these rubber tie downs, which is exactly what panels on the harvesters I used to work on when I was a kid, working on the family farm had, and I found that hilarious, and piece of nostalgia. So how the doors work is close, that latch is in the way, and you reach in and get it in. And what's kind of nice is that holds the door in, but it has a little bit of give, which is kind of nice when you're actually sitting in the car and that door's in the way. When you run into it, it's not a solid object. The other thing about the doors is really cars like this in period had doors because the rules said you had to have doors. Just as it was then, as it is now, the easiest way to get in and out of the car is to leave the doors there and just step in. And if you need to, when you're getting out, you can stand on this middle thing and just hop out. So I don't really plan on using the doors much, but I had to make them. Okay, that brings us to the next stage of the bodywork, which is now that the body is all securely mounted to the car in the way it's going to be mounted, and I've done it with lining up the pieces as best I can to make it flow from the tail, from the nose to the tail, is now we've got to take care of these panel gaps. And some of it is making panel gaps smaller, but a lot of it is really just making them consistent. Like if you look here, this is actually pretty darn good. I mean, that's less than 1/8 of an inch. And it's kind of 1/8 of an inch is kind of what we're aiming at. But you see it gets wider until here. This is kind of bad, but it's made all the worse by the fact that it's narrower here and you see it getting wider. So this is all pretty close. This needs less, needs maybe a 1/16 of an inch to get to 1/8 of an inch. So this will just be some light filler in there. You can see a similar problem here. The gap is pretty good here, but then it just suddenly gets wider. So we'll actually put some carbon fiber material in there and then filler over that, because this is getting pretty wide. I can almost stick my finger in there. And then down here, when I cut the body here, trimmed it, I was just kind of guessing where the frame would meet up with it, and I got this side wrong. So this corner here is actually just about right, but you can see it gets wider till I can put my finger in down here. So we'll actually add some carbon fiber material down, and we'll add like 1 inch down, and then mark it off and cut it so that this is meeting up with that well. And then over here we'll cut this so that this curve here better meets up with this here. Although I kind of like that this is off, just because it reminds me of cars in period. How often you see things like that. This is a little extreme, and cutting this will make this lighter, and since I have to pick it up every time I take it off, it'll be that much lighter. Then you can see this mark I've made here. I'm going to open the wheel well, opening up a little bit. Partly this is just to make this a nice smooth curve, and also I wanted this on the ground before I did the final trimming to make sure I wasn't cutting more than I needed away. These wheels and tires stick out a 1/4 inch more this way than the wheels and tires I'm going to use, and are a 1/2 inch taller total, so a 1/4 inch on each end. So what I'm trying to do is make it so that these tires just barely fit, and I'll lower the spring and jack the wheel up so that I can show it under compression, make sure I can still move the wheel in and out. But when this setup is just barely fits, then I know we're good, and when I put the actual wheels and tires that it's going to have on. Then over here, this side is probably the worst. You see how bad this goes from being halfway decent here to getting pretty wide, and then this going past. So we'll add some material here and in there. And if you look, if I get down low, you can see the door actually sticks up slightly higher than the bodywork here. So we'll just add a little bit of filler to kind of get that to match up better. But you know, this kind of stuff is, you want it to be right everywhere, but you find this part lines up and then this part doesn't line up, and so you kind of pick your battles of where you think you can fix things more easily. So here it is. I didn't bother filming the painting, I figured the last thing this series needs is another sanding montage. This is single stage paint from TCP Global. I like the single stage because it's kind of period correct to what you see on a race car. Obviously if you do dual stage, you'll get a much deeper gloss, but I like the look of this. It's also nice for touching things up, because this car is going to get run hard, it's going to get beat up, it's going to get scratched up, and it's nice to be able to touch things up kind of easily. The other thing I like about it is, especially with me painting outside like I do, not having climate control, I find that although I can usually get at least one panel of the car to have paint that lies perfectly smooth, I never get all of the panels to not have some little bit of orange peel. So what I like about this is it takes the stress out of that, because I can just put on 5 or 6 coats and then color sand it, and everything comes out consistent. It looks great. Covers a multitude of sins that way, and it's just kind of low stress. You know, other than the possibility of burning through something when you're sanding, but just put plenty of paint on when you do that. Full disclosure, I don't like the look of these wheels. Now, not the Halobrand style. I like that. These are the Cobra style. Yeah, I prefer the GT40 style for what I'm doing, but these are close enough. But no, what I don't like is these are 17-inch rims. It's so I can use a more modern tire. And I don't like the look of bigger rims with the short profile tires on a vintage car. I don't think it looks right. So why am I doing this? The idea with these wheels is that I would use them on the GT40, I'll use them on the Indy car, I'll use them on this, that I buy just one set of tires and I use them on all the vehicles, and that I would use some more modern options of rubber. And you might say, well, why don't you just go get some Avons and have some real race tires that are good? I would love to. The reason I started looking into this at the time was a couple of years ago. Avon was closing up shop. Now, as far as I understand, they're back. The problem with Avon, though, is they sell through distributors, and we've got a great one up in the Bay Area, but it's a 2-hour drive through traffic for me to get up there, 2-hour drive back. So for me to get tires, you know, I have a kid and a job. I basically have to take a day off work to do it, and I would rather do something else with a day off work. With Hoosiers, I just go on the computer, type in a few things, and it shows up within a day or two, which is really nice. So, you know, I don't like the look of these things, but these are Hoosier A7s from what I've tested before on the Indy car. They're going to be fast. You know, if it's fast, I'll come to love them. But the car, having been sitting here for so long with 15-inch wheels on it, I really like the look of those. So, you know, maybe in the future I switched back to 15-inch rims and I get some Avon rubber. But for now, we're doing this. Flipper. So it needs to be a little wider. Yeah, so I am really excited to be done with this phase. As you can tell from the series, I'm not that big into bodywork. This has been all show. I'm more about the go. So I'm excited to get to the next episode where we're going to drop an engine in this thing and make it go. So stay tuned for that.